Picture the Arabian Sea, dead of night, 2 in the morning. A massive $2.5 billion destroyer turns its back on Iran, hauling straight south. Listen, they aren't retreating from battle damage or exhaustion. Half a day ago, these guys launched their absolute final Tomahawk. Tube 96 sent that missile into a hidden IRGC mountain bunker. Absolute success, leaving the enemy base in ruins. Zero hull damage, sailors primed for war, yet they retreat. Why? All 96 vertical launch tubes are completely bone dry. We're talking 3,500-pound rockets, 20 feet long, $2 million a piece. Out in these open waters, they can't reload a single one. Doing it mid-ocean is suicide. They desperately need a solid dock and shore crane, sitting over 2,000 miles away down in Diego Garcia. That's a brutal 7-day trip, plus nearly a week stuck helpless under that crane. Add another week, sailing back. This ultimate high-tech maritime predator is benched for almost a month, paralyzed just because it ran out of ammo. All because we lack the machinery to restock it mid-ocean. Here's the crazy part. The tech exists and works, but it's still in testing, so the active fleets don't even have it. It literally showed up a whole conflict too late. In under 5 weeks, we launched 850 Tomahawks, breaking the entire Iraq record. The most massive cruise missile barrage we've ever unleashed. But the media ignores the terrifying question, how do we restock them? If that chilling reality grabs you, hit subscribe to Navy Decoded. We aren't here cheering for explosions, I'm here figuring out if our firepower actually lasts. Let's dive into why the richest naval force outspending the next 9 countries combined is totally helpless at mid-ocean reloading. Look at the brutal physics stopping us. It all starts with the launch tube. Over 60 warships rely on the Mark 41 system. It's the absolute lifeblood of our surface fleet. I'm talking every single Arleigh Burke and Ticonderoga vessel out there. Picture a heavy steel box about 25 inches wide. A terrifyingly tight squeeze. Now, imagine the monster we cram inside. You're stuffing a Block 5 Tomahawk inside. That's 20 feet of pure destruction, weighing 3,500 pounds. A jet engine, hundreds of pounds of deadly explosives, and a massive rocket booster packed with highly volatile fuel. This isn't your everyday Amazon package, one mistake and you're dead. We're dropping a massive bomb into a tiny metal slot, requiring the totally steady hands of a brain surgeon. On solid ground with a massive dock crane, it's a breeze. Pick the payload up, drop it straight down. Tracks lock it in, and boom, finished. The ground stays still, and gravity does all the heavy lifting. But out in deep water, total nightmare. Your ship violently shifts in 6 directions, constantly throwing the nose up and down. The vessel slams side to side, dropping into massive waves, violently twisting and surging. The floor literally drops out from under you before the machinery reacts. That's the exact scientific nightmare, ruining everything. Dangling a 3,500-pound explosive off a wire essentially creates an uncontrollable giant wrecking ball. The boat tilts left, your deadly payload violently swings right, bouncing with every single wave. Because the equipment can't catch up to the ocean's violent movement, that massive missile starts swinging totally out of control. Even in perfectly moderate waters, that deadly pendulum swings way too far to ever safely fit into a VLS tube. The payload slams the metal rim. You just smash thousands of pounds of high explosives directly into a steel wall. One bad bump, and the mission ends. Every single sailor is abandoning ship immediately. That's exactly why the military gave up. You simply cannot argue with gravity. Those older Arleigh Burke ships, specifically models DDG 51 through 78, actually tried a half-baked fix. They installed tiny front and rear cranes, desperately hoping to physically muscle the rockets down into the deck. Swallowing up 3 precious launch spots dropped their payload from 96 to 90. But honestly, the terrifying swinging wasn't even the worst part. Those onboard cranes were incredibly weak. They couldn't even handle a fully loaded Tomahawk. Even on completely flat oceans, they couldn't safely maneuver the most vital weapon in modern naval combat. On paper, sure, you could maybe restock the smaller rockets mid-voyage. In reality, they demanded perfectly still water, and finding a glassy ocean out in the Pacific is practically a fairy tale. After years struggling, Command called it. The brutal swinging physics made mid-ocean VLS reloading completely suicidal. They made a tough call. From hull DDG-79 forward, they ripped those useless cranes completely out of the blueprints. So we swapped them out for 6 extra launch tubes, right? Bumping our total payload up from 90 to 96. Just 6 more rockets. But the cost? Our Navy gave up the power to rearm our main guns out on the open water forever. Back in 1999, that actually sounded like a smart deal. We figured future fights would be fast and brutally precise. We assumed 96 shots was all we'd ever need to absolutely crush the enemy before heading home. That gamble actually paid off for 25 years. Then Operation Epic Fury kicked off. Let me paint a picture of what those tubes actually unleashed. We hurled 850 cruise missiles from our subs and destroyers in just the first 5 weeks of the conflict. Look, nobody else on this planet has the factories, the hardcore training, or the massive supply lines to pull that off. Nobody else can rain down that kind of pinpoint hell from so far away. But listen to me, this isn't about broken gear. This is a terrifying tale of gear working so damn well that it completely choked the supply lines keeping it fed. Central Command verified over 12,000 strike missions, hammering targets deep inside Iranian borders. Our Tomahawks absolutely shredded their military command centers. We vaporized the ballistic rocket bunkers, keeping their whole war machine running, and we flattened their drone factories. We left their airstrips looking like the moon and completely wiped their naval hubs off the map. More than 155 enemy warships got gutted right at the docks, completely paralyzed before they even knew what hit them. That opening barrage on February 28th basically decapitated their top brass, and our follow-up punches crippled their nuclear dreams for years. Within just 5 weeks, the president was already announcing we had basically secured all our main goals. 850 rockets, $1.7 billion of smart bombs, and every single damn one flew perfectly. But here is the nightmare. You shoot that much, and you run out. Every rocket you launch leaves an empty, dead tube. To get that launcher firing again, you need a heavy dock crane sitting 2,000 miles away from the actual war zone. Do the math with me here. A top-tier destroyer is packing 96 of those tubes. When the fight gets brutal, we are ripple-firing cruise missiles at targets that need to die immediately. Throw in air defense rockets to protect the carriers, and suddenly those magazines are completely bone-dry in days. Just days. Once that final shot flies, the captain has a terrifying choice: sit there defenseless and useless or run. So they run. That is when the real bleeding starts, limping all the way to a friendly harbor that actually has the specialized reloading gear. Sure, Bahrain has the right cranes, but during the conflict, that port was an absolute madhouse. Docks were jam-packed, crews were working themselves to death, and ships were just floating in line. If you cannot get in, you are sailing 2,500 miles to Diego Garcia. If that fails, you are headed way out to Crete, adding over 3,400 miles to your desperate commute. Think about it. A week out, a few days reloading, a week back. That is a $2.5 billion war machine completely out of the fight for 3 long weeks. Now, scale that nightmare up. Imagine 10 of our best ships holding the line. If they shoot all their ammo in a week, you instantly have a third of your entire fleet completely out of action, driving away to restock. Another third is just stuck waiting in line at the dock. You only have a fraction actually fighting. The issue is not that we lack guns. We lack ships in the fight, ironically because our guns work too well. And this is not some brand new problem. Back in 2024, our guys in the Red Sea completely blew through their interceptor stockpiles, swatting down rebel drones in a matter of weeks. Because they could not rearm on the water, those battle groups had to pull all the way back to the Mediterranean. Running to distant Allied ports left massive, dangerous holes in our defense network that stayed wide open for days. The enemy was not stupid. They saw the openings and struck. In May, a massive tanker got its engines completely blown out by a rogue missile. By June, another cargo vessel took a direct hit and went straight to the bottom, followed by a third ship getting nailed shortly after. 3 civilian ships got blasted simply because one of our warships had to leave to reload before backup could arrive. Now rewind the clock with me. February 23rd, 1945. 2 massive ships pulled right up next to each other out in the choppy Pacific, slinging heavy bombs back and forth using bare-bones cables and nets. It was messy, insanely risky, but it worked. You had guys physically wrestling live explosives while 2 giant hulls were cruising side by side at 12 knots. That crazy stunt worked because old-school 500-pound bombs were just solid iron lumps. You could literally kick them around, bang them up, and they would be fine. Now look at the delicate monsters sitting in our launch tubes today. A modern cruise missile is absolutely nothing like those old iron bombs. You are dealing with a 20-foot-long, ultra-sensitive smart computer packed full of incredibly explosive fuel. You cannot just toss that in a cargo net. There is no old-school cable trick that lets you drop a 3,500-pound explosive needle into a tiny 25-inch hole while the ocean is throwing you around. Look, for almost a century, our navies had 0 issues tossing gas, grub, and bullets between moving ships out on the ocean. But there is one critical, game-changing asset they absolutely cannot swap out there. I'm talking about the very weapon that keeps us alive, the guided missile. It's wildly dangerous, ridiculously fragile, and demands 0 margin for error. Command saw this nightmare coming. By 2022, Johns Hopkins engineers started building TRAM, a revolutionary at-sea missile swapping rig. Their massive eureka moment? Kill the swinging pendulum effect entirely. Picture dangling a live bomb on a wire while ocean waves toss you around. TRAM ditches that wire, crushing the tube in an iron grip hydraulic vise instead. Zero dangling cables, zero swinging death traps. They literally bolt the weapon right to the ship's firing silos via steel track. When the hull rocks, the weapon rocks right along with it. It acts like a single solid piece of metal. You totally erase the terrifying physics of two giant objects crashing into each other. Since everything is chained to the exact same skeleton, it's brilliant. Here's the play-by-play. A massive supply runner, like the USNS Washington Chambers, rolls up right next to our warship in the middle of nowhere. They shoot the weapon over using the standard high-wire rig they've used for decades to move basic supplies. But the second it hits the deck, heavy-duty robotic arms lock on. The track glides it flat across the ship right over the empty firing silo. Then, the rig physically cranks that massive tube straight up into the air, a full 90 degrees. A built-in winch flawlessly slides the weapon down into the silo. No hoping the wind cooperates, it's pure, controlled fluid power dictating every inch. We aren't relying on blind luck or praying the ocean spares us anymore. They proved it worked on dry land first, wrapping up California tests on July 15, 2024. By October 11, 2024, they hit the deep water. The crew on the cruiser USS Chosen shoved a dummy round into a silo off San Diego, fighting through seriously nasty Sea State 4 waves. Sure, it wasn't the absolute hellstorm you'd face in the Middle East, but it proved the engineering wasn't just a pipe dream. The weapon locked in perfectly. Even Navy Secretary Carlos Del Toro stepped up and branded it an absolute paradigm shift. Fast forward to July 2025. The destroyer USS Farragut ran it during massive fleet drills, slashing reload times and proving the scales up beautifully. Command's master plan? Get this life-saving tech onto every deck by late 2026 or early 2027. But then Operation Epic Fury kicks off on February 28, 2026, and guess what? This miracle system wasn't ready. The exact hardware designed to keep our ships from abandoning the fight for 3 agonizing weeks, stuck in bureaucratic purgatory. We watched our guys blast through 850 interceptors, utterly helpless to restock a single tube while under heavy fire. Take a step back with me, because a way more terrifying reality surfaces a fatal flaw even this robotic arm cannot fix. Yeah, TRAM fixes the crane issue. It trades a pathetic 3-week retreat to port for a rapid 4-hour pit stop just 30 miles behind the kill zone. Once it finally hits the water, and believe me, it completely rewrites how we wage war at sea. Our warships won't have to retreat, we won't leave gaping holes in our defenses, that massive bleeding loop vanishes. Here is the heart-stopping catch. TRAM just moves ammo, it doesn't build it. Let's do that math again, slowly. Our guys launched over 850 Tomahawk cruise missiles in a span of just 5 weeks. We haven't seen a burn rate that's psychotic for a smart weapon since the damn things were invented. That is literally more firepower than the entire 2003 Iraq invasion combined. Now get this. RTX only builds about 60 to 90 of these a year. It's a pathetic trickle meant for peaceful times and peaceful budgets. 850 weapons spent in 5 weeks, yet we only build 60 to 90 annually. We literally vaporized a decade of manufacturing output in 35 days. Sure, the defense contractors are scrambling now. RTX finally inked deals back in February 2026, desperately trying to crank out 1,000 rounds annually. But you can't just flip a switch. Every Tomahawk relies on over 100 suppliers and thousands of complex microparts. You're staring down the barrel of an 18 to 24-month wait from the order date to the delivery day. Ramping up heavy industry isn't a digital software patch. It takes raw steel, specialized machinery, and massive human labor. Let's circle back to that swinging pendulum, the missing crane, and the reckless gamble of choosing 96 silos instead of 90. Earlier, ripping out those onboard cranes felt like the catastrophic blunder that doomed our sailors. But that brutal truth hits different now. Even if we kept those cranes, even if that swinging death trap never existed, our warships would still sit totally empty, simply because the factories cannot build these weapons fast enough. Look, our absolute biggest enemy here isn't the miles or the math, it's the ticking clock. We're talking about the agonizing hours spent melting steel, wiring smart chips, and greenlighting rocket engines, only to rush that lethal package to a destroyer burning through ammo quicker than any factory can pump it out. Sure, the TRAM tech cracks the first nightmare jamming a fresh rocket from a cargo boat into a launch tube out on the open water, but it completely ignores the real heart attack, making sure that resupply vessel actually has enough ammo stockpiled to begin with. Operation Epic Fury just became the first massive firefight since World War II where our entire naval fleet burned through smart weapons faster than American factories could possibly replace them. I wouldn't call that a simple flaw. It's an absolutely terrifying new reality. Any military pushing itself to the brink in an endless dogfight will hit this wall. You can't magically speed up an assembly line just because a bloody war zone is begging for more firepower. If you're finally picturing sweaty assembly lines instead of massive battleships when imagining true ocean supremacy, hit that subscribe button for Navy Decoded. Send this to that friend who's still dead wrong, believing airborne missiles win conflicts, ignoring the machinery actually building them. Now, force yourself back to that exact terrifying scene we opened with. A $2.5 billion warship retreating from the bloodbath at 2 in the morning. 96 launch tubes, completely bone dry, limping south just to reach a plain concrete dock and a stationary, bolted-down lifting rig. Sidelined for 3 agonizing weeks. The brass originally designed that beast to haul 96 rockets. They ripped out the onboard reloading cranes just to squeeze in 6 extra slots. For 25 straight years, that deadly gamble actually paid off. 96 felt like enough, until a brutal 5-week bloodbath chewed through 850 of them. This TRAM system patches up part of the nightmare, a heavy-duty hydraulic track locked onto a launcher, grabbing a 3,500-pound tube with an iron grip, forcing it down into a launch bay while the raging ocean fights back. That chaotic swinging motion, the wild physics that destroyed every past effort, is finally dead. Warships will finally rearm right beside cargo boats instead of fleeing home. Those terrifying defensive blind spots vanish. That agonizing retreat cycle ends here. But remember, TRAM just shifts the ammo, it doesn't actually build it. We spend 18 agonizing months building a single Tomahawk cruise missile. Then, it takes 12 terrifying seconds to shoot it off. The absolute most critical piece of hardware in today's ocean combat isn't the fancy radar painting the enemy. It isn't even the deadly warhead blowing them up. It isn't the firing tube spitting it out, or that heavy hydraulic arm stuffing it back in either. It's that gritty, unseen equipment sitting on an industrial floor, sweating to transform raw steel into a smart weapon. That machine takes absolutely zero orders from admirals. It strictly answers to the brutal reality of raw metal, extreme heat, and a ticking clock.